We come now to the 10-minute rule motion. Paula Sherriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to make provision for certain public buildings to have toilets which meet the needs of persons with a range of disability and accessibility requirements and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, I realise that access to toilets may sound far from a glamorous political campaign. As a somewhat taboo subject, although I am an MP who has often not been afraid to raise taboo subjects in this House, it is rarely mentioned in the media or indeed in political debate. It is something that most of us take for granted. Rarely do we ever hear when basic human rights for our citizens are listed, so much is it taken as a given. When it is raised, it is usually with reference to the developing world, where quite rightly campaigners are seeking to raise the importance of people's access to basic sanitation and hygiene. Yet there are too many people who are denied it here in modern Britain as well. So let me start by making it clear what my bill means by fully accessible toilets, more commonly known as changing places toilets. Changing places toilets should not be confused with standard disabled toilets. They are designed to meet the needs of people with complex needs, providing a height-adjustable adult-sized changing bench, a tracking hoist system or mobile hoist, adequate space in the changing area for the disabled person and up to 2 carers, a centrally placed toilet with room either side, a screen or a curtain for privacy, and wide tear-off paper roll to cover the bench, a large waste bin for disposable pads, and a non-slip floor. As the regulations stand, changing places toilets are recommended in larger buildings, such as large train stations, motorway service stations and museums, but not mandatory. And as a minimum, my bill seeks to strengthen those regulations to make the provision of changing places toilets mandatory in large new builds, complexes with public access, or sites where visitors can reasonably be expected to spend long periods of time. And I would ask every member in this House this afternoon that if you're not aware that we have a changing places facility here in the Palace of Westminster, please take a moment or two today to actually establish where it is, because it may be one day soon that somebody will actually ask you if there is a changing places facility available in this place. And of course, it is ever important that we are seeking to set an example here in Parliament. And this has been the aim of the Changing Places Consortium, who launched their campaign in 2006 on behalf of over 250,000 people here in the UK who cannot use standard accessible toilets. And that includes 130,000 older people, 40,000 people with profound and multiple learning disabilities, 30,000 people with cerebral palsy, 13,000 people with an acquired brain injury, 8,500 people with multiple sclerosis, 8,000 people with spina bifida, 500 people with motor neurone disease, and I'm sure there are many more. And the number of people with complex disabilities is growing. Medical advances mean that more babies are thankfully saved where once they may not have been, but often they will require considerable assistance as children and as adults. And we are all living longer, and older people make up an even larger proportion of our population. So the need for extra provision will only get greater. And it will be a sad reflection on our priorities as a society if basic freedoms like going out with your family or with friends were restricted by the absence of suitable toilet facilities. Yet every week this is actually a reality for thousands of people who are denied access to many of our country's most popular attractions. And while drafting this bill, I heard from too many people who suffer in this way. Kerry from Milton Keynes has a form of muscular dystrophy and her husband is a full-time carer. She told me, taking a simple trip out these days can be a military operation. We have a checklist of things to take, especially if it's more than a few hours out. The biggest problem I face when going anywhere is when it comes to using a disabled toilet. Some are simply too small to fit me, wheelchair and my husband. It can sometimes feel very claustrophobic, and I find myself limiting my time out because you just can't risk the embarrassment of having an accident, which is exactly what I'm doing more times than I care to admit to. Adam George is 11 years old and he requires a toilet with a ceiling hoist and an adult-sized changing table. He loves outdoors activities and his favourite place to go for a day out is the nearby Flambard's theme park. But as he got bigger, the family couldn't manage with a standard disabled toilet. His mother Rachel says she made excuses for a year as to why they couldn't go out, telling him it was closed. But after consulting the park about installing equipment to meet Adam's needs, the family have now made the difficult decision to undertake legal action against Flambard's. And Rachel quite rightly asks, can you imagine not being able to access a toilet on a family day out, especially one you have just paid a lot of money for? Do you just go to places expecting your toilet needs to be met? And why shouldn't disabled people expect the same? Samantha Buck's son, Alfie, is 7 years old and was born with quadriplegic cerebral palsy after being starved of oxygen at birth. They go into town regularly to shop, have lunch and to meet up with other mums for coffee with their disabled children and teenagers in the same situation. Samantha explains what she has to go through. This is what I'm forced to do with my 7-year-old son. I have to lie him on a urine-soaked floor inside the disabled loo with the second carer standing outside with his wheelchair. They have to pass the changing accessories through the open door for all passers-by to view. And this is one of the most awful experiences I have to face every time I come into town. And Samantha set about campaigning for better facilities for Alfie and for the thousands of people who face the same struggles as them every day. And I'm glad to tell the House that her local council has now agreed to put in 2 changing place toilets. But she feels that the responsibility shouldn't just be for the parents and carers to lobby councils. Current data suggests that there are only 1,123 changing place toilets in the UK, with the highest concentrations in major cities. Some areas don't have a facility even within an hour's drive, so people are either confined in their home or have to rush back if nature calls, or they have to face the indignity of being changed on the dirty floor of public toilets. And needless to say, the result can be social isolation. And the availability of even the existing facilities is under threat, as public services like libraries are being closed. And often, these buildings provided the only changing place facilities in an area. But sadly, this is rarely a priority when local authority budgets bear the brunt of unprecedented cuts. In my area of Kirklees, the nearest changing place toilet was lost when the local children's playground closed due to government cuts. Another issue is that many accessible toilets provide for children but not for adults who also need them. A hospital local to my area has its changing places toilet situated on the children's ward. Unfortunately, adults with disabilities cannot access this for safeguarding reasons. So we need to urgently rethink our attitude to toilets. Simply labelling a facility as disabled or as accessible doesn't guarantee that it is suitable. Most do not have a hoist system or a large changing bench, and disabled and accessible toilets have been found with no level access or heavy or narrow doors that are not automated, often with unsuitable or unclean handles and locks. Diverse facilities are also needed to reflect the diversity of the people who need them. Some need bright fluorescent lights or air fresheners to reduce anxiety, whilst for others these can lead to sensory overload. Madam Deputy Speaker, my bill addresses one of those issues that sometimes suffers from being a little bit taboo. But for the sake of those who suffer in silence, I believe it must be tackled head on, and I do hope that the whole House will join me with this campaign.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Nick Dakin, Robert Talfon, Layla Moran, Jill Furness, Tracy Brabin, Rushanara Ali, Mary Cray, Ruth Smith, Chris Elmore, Kevin James, Marsha de Cordova and myself.
Paula Sherriff.
Toilet Provision and Accessibility Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 23rd of November 2018.
Friday, the 23rd of November. Well done.